Hey team, you're about to experience my interview with Randy Mercer. Randy is the CPO or Chief Product Officer of One World Sync. One World Sync is an end-to-end product content automation platform. One World Sync allows you to gather, aggregate, transform, and distribute and syndicate your product, content, and data across all channels. We had a fantastic conversation about the challenges facing modern businesses around content management and data around products. I learned a ton. I think you will too. Enjoy. This is the E-commerce Edge podcast with your host, Jason Greenwood. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. It is my great pleasure to welcome Randy Mercer from One World Sync to the podcast. Welcome, Randy.
Thanks, Jason. Happy to be here.
Look, we've been trying to connect up and make our schedules work for a little while now, and it's great to finally be able to have this conversation with you today.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to be here. Excited to talk about what we do over here.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to having a chat with you. But before we get into One World Sync and what you guys do, you've been in the tech space for a while, but what drew you to, I wouldn't say that your platform specifically is focused on e-commerce, but definitely into the retail tech space. What drew you into this world?
Yeah, I really got drawn into it just out of having an evolution of what I had been doing for many years prior to what we're really focused on today. And in short, I got associated with One World Sync about 20 years ago as a technology partner. And back then we were focused on supply chain and logistics type master data synchronization and so forth. Anyways, that evolved. I eventually ended up as an employee here about 10 years ago. And just by nature of the evolution of commerce in general and the transition from just pure brick and mortar to more of this hybrid digital experience, our org really just, followed suit with that in terms of how we help our customers.
Wow. And look, this whole thing around product data, and again, we'll get into One World Sync shortly, but it's interesting because I work so heavily in the B2B e-commerce space in particular, and I've drilled down into that space heavily over the last 3.5 years. And every single report that comes out, we've had 2 or 3 B2B e-commerce reports come out in the last 3 to 4 months around what is holding back B2B buyers from adopting the B2B e-commerce channels that some of their suppliers offer. And secondarily, why a lot of B2B brands still do not offer e-commerce for their customers. And they have a pure field sales team. Maybe they take orders via customer service, email, carrier pigeon, fax, etc. And in every single one of these research reports and polls that happen, in every single one of these, product data and issues around product data are either at the top of the list or near the top of the list as barriers to either accessibility by customers or barriers to adoption by the brands themselves in terms of creating digital sales channels. And I think that this is such an interesting thing because it's something I see every single day when I consult with B2B brands. Half the challenges I'm helping them solve are data challenges, especially around product data. Either they don't have it at all, they don't have enough of it, it's not rationalized, it's not consistent, they have to get it from many different sources, they get it in many different formats, they have it sitting all over network drives in the business, maybe physical catalogs, etc. So this whole product data challenge is just rife within our industry, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. And by the way, you mentioned carrier pigeon, but you did not mention smoke signals. So that's another one that we see. Everything you just described there, Jason, is justification for my product roadmap and has been for going back 20 years because, where we started was back before e-com was even a thing. And it really was just about the master data that supports the process of ordering product, shipping product, warehousing it, and then ultimately in those days, just getting it on the shelf, all of that. And if you now fast forward 20 years from where we started, when we're talking to the retail side of our customer base, we always go into those conversations really excited to talk about e-com. And very often they reset the conversation back to, guys, we're still struggling with master data. So how do you help us with that? And of course, we're happy to talk about that because that's our core competency forever. But just all of the things that you talked about in terms of data just being stored on sticky notes and whiteboards and you name it inside behind the walls of the brands, again, that's just what we've really developed a core competency around helping them with that, getting that into a tool whereby they could really manage it effectively and then ultimately deliver it out to the whoever it is, retail or the distribution. When you think of B2B, getting it out into that landscape in a very sustainable way so that it's accurate. And it's just amazing the extent to which that practice still has not been perfected by a lot of organizations out there today.
And it's interesting because what I've seen over the last 5 years in particular is this emphasis on PIM systems, which is great. And I love to see it because the reality is ERPs are not PIM systems and they shouldn't be expected to be. They're not ERPs are not syndication platforms and they shouldn't be expected to be. They are not digital channels in and of themselves and they shouldn't be expected to be. I love the fact that businesses are now starting to recognize the importance of dedicated e-commerce platforms, EDI platforms, punch out technology. I love the fact that they have this emphasis on that. I love the fact that they're understanding data as an asset and they're starting to treat it like an asset within dedicated systems that are designed to house that data, organize that data, and ultimately be able to syndicate that data out to digital channels. But one thing that seems to get overlooked pretty regularly is how do we aggregate? How do we collect this data in the first place to get it into our PIM systems, to get the core product data into our ERPs, to then be able to slice and dice it in the right ways for our digital channels and to get it out there in the market and to get it out into, as you rightly pointed out in the B2B world, get it out into our distributors' hands. And so there's been this massive emphasis on organizing data and structuring data, but sources of data, collecting the data, aggregating the data, curating the data, that is still a massive hurdle, isn't it?
It really is. And again, just as you say it, it just takes me back 20 years because that's literally where I started in this space. I had I think it was a dairy manufacturer as a customer at the time. I was doing technology consulting, and they said, "Hey, we've been asked to get this data over to this retailer, and this is how they want us to do it." Inside our organization, we've got it in our ERP system. Some of it's in our PLM, and they said, "We don't really want to be in that business. So can you just write something that pulls it out of those systems, packages it up, and pushes it over?" So I wrote that thing back then as just a back office piece of technology. Today, we now own that technology at One World Sync, and it has evolved into really a PIM application, but very focused on the practice of integrating into back office systems within brands, pulling that data out, aggregating it, putting it into whatever format it needs to be in to push outside of the organization. And then we deploy it on the other side to unpack it and then proliferate it out into systems on that side. So yeah, still today, again, we're still selling that tool, which means there's still people not quite doing it right, and we're helping them try to get there. But it is still a very pervasive problem throughout our customer base.
And there's also global organizations and global standards for a lot of types of product data from GS1, GDSN, ISBNs, UPCs. There are some global standards and also global standards organizations where certain data is held, it's aggregated, it's validated, and then it is also distributed. And this is also a major problem for a lot of brands because they need to both get their product data, if they're a manufacturer, sometimes into the hands of a GS1, for example, and be able to pull down barcodes that can be used globally for their products, be able to assign UPCs to their products, etc. So there's a lot of other organizations that influence this whole data generation, creation, syndication process. And this also adds to the complexity for a lot of these brands, doesn't it?
100%. And interestingly, our organization at all, we used to be owned by a global standards organization. Up until about 4.5 years ago, we got acquired by private equity, which I said at the time was just one of the best things that happened to our organization. Because when you look at the global standards, obviously they're very important so that everybody can operate in a similar way and actually make things work. But operate a little bit with blinders on relative to how some of that stuff impacts the brands and the retailers and the distributors in terms of how they interact with this data. What we've been able to do, and part of our job is to just help our brands and retailers navigate the use of those standards and actually implement the use of them technically versus just understanding in practice like what they mean. But what we've been able to do now that we're not owned by that organization is we still do a lot of the same things, but we just think a lot bigger about how you use those standards to impact things just more broadly across commerce. And then because we came from that, we've just got some very direct line of sight to things that are happening across the industry in terms of initiatives that involve standards that are going to really impact the retail industry over the next couple of years a lot. So again, we just try to help our customer base really digest those standards, understand how to use them, and then actually put them into practice with technology to make them all work.
And what we've seen also is a bifurcation in the industry of technologies and platforms to where now a lot of this stuff to do with product data that was formerly either loosely linked together or wasn't linked together at all. We've seen this a conscious decoupling of systems that help to manage product data, all the way from the PLM, the product lifecycle management platforms, where an initial tech pack is created around a product, the original design, the packaging, etc., may be created in the PLM. Then usually what happens from there is the PLM data will then go into a PIM system where it'll be further enriched with marketing data, global standards data, global barcoding and ISBNs and UPCs, etc. And then it will be from there, it will be syndicated out to wholesalers, distributors, retailers, etc. But we will also be getting input into that process from, say, contract manufacturers, right? So in the PLM process, when it goes from effectively a concept to the tech pack and the PLM being sent to, say, a contract manufacturer, being validated by that contract manufacturer, and then the finished goods information being plumbed back into that PLM. So, for example, the exact uh, card weight of a cardboard box around a pair of shoes or something like that, the exact weight and dimensions of a specific good, etc. Then we have that fully attributed base product information. Then we have to add all of the romance copy. We have to add all the marketing information. We have to add the product descriptions. We have to add structured product data attributes that customers on the end consumers are going to use to find and identify those products. And so that we rank well from an SEO perspective, we've got to have all that product data wrapped around the product. So there's a heck of a lot of systems now that come into play. So we got ERPs, we got PLMs, we got PIMs, we got syndication platforms, and then we have omni-channel platforms. So we've got platforms like Channel Advisor and many other omni-channel platforms that basically can take product data out of our PIM systems, for example, and then distribute that across channels. And it might be going to marketplaces, it might be going to social channels, it might be going to our e-commerce websites, it might be going wherever it's got to go. And so we've had this deep specialization happening in our industry for a long time now, where we now have to architect, and as a solution architect, I've oftentimes got to go in and help brands say, okay, do you need a PLM? Great, let's do search and select for that. Okay, cool. Do you need a PIM? Okay, cool. We've identified you need a PIM. Now let's do search and select for that. Now let's do search and select for your omni-channel syndication platform or your data aggregation platform to put information in and out of the PIM. So in some ways it's got simpler because the technology is now more advanced than it's ever been. But in some ways it's harder because brands are going, we're not technical experts. All we know is we need to get data from one point to another, and we need your help to help us figure out how to make that happen. And that is becoming something I'm seeing more and more of every day. Is that what you're seeing too?
Yeah, I have a slide in one of my pitch decks where we've got a quote from our customer that says just that. They said, "We're not an IT company. We don't want to be, but we've had to become one because of all these systems that we now have to use." And that quote's from probably 4 years ago. And so that's part of what we think about relative to our roadmap, and our roadmap being what are we engineering, but also what are we acquiring, aimed at how do you start bringing this back together? And we use the word harmonization a lot. So harmonize some of these processes. Well, yeah, we do think about how do we help these guys just return back to just manufacturing the products that they're good at, not having to be an IT company to put all this stuff together. One of the challenges is, again, what the story you tell there is partially what we've been working to solve for a long time, but it also then depicts like what's on our roadmap to keep pulling all this together, right? But the challenge is every brand you walk into, they're starting from a different place. And so to help them just understand what do you have and how do you use that? And if you just plug this piece and this piece into this, then it'll work a little bit better. So yeah, we spend a lot of our time just helping the brands get out of their own way relative to how they solve for these issues.
And if we think about what you guys do kind of all under one roof in One World Sync, can we think of you, or maybe somebody out there in the audience has heard of a Syndigo, or maybe they've heard of a Salsify, or maybe they've heard of InRiver, maybe they've heard of PIMCore, maybe they've heard of some of these other PLMs like B Product, etc. And so is it your goal with your platform to bring all of that technology under one roof? So to try to be all things to all brands, is that ultimately your goal to be able to handle things all the way from product lifecycle, start to finish, to syndication, to enrichment, to and everything in between? Is it your goal to ultimately be that one-stop shop for all of these technologies?
Short answer is yes. I'd qualify just a couple of things. And most of those organizations that you mentioned, most of them are either partners or in some case bidirectional customers, meaning we pay them for some stuff and they pay us for them stuff or for other things, right? So point being is all of us, I think, are probably all going to have some core competencies that maybe we're just a little bit better at than the other guy. And that's okay because there's a lot to go around, but there's a certain amount of this that really deserves to be pulled together under an umbrella of capabilities because it's also relative to one another. There's some outlier capabilities that we maybe don't think too hard about bringing under the umbrella. Digital asset management is one of those that it seems to work pretty well with the providers that are out there, and we're not so concerned that we have to, own that capability. We can interact with it so fluidly that it's okay that it's just serviced from where it is today. Yet there's other types of capability where it just does the nature of the capability itself. It just lends itself to a better experience on behalf of the brand if it is packaged up with a few other related things. Yes, we do want to solve for a lot of that, bring a lot under the umbrella, but always going to be a few pieces of capability that we're just going to accept they're in better hands somewhere else, probably.
And so when you start thinking about your core competency and you start to think what is our differentiating factor that really sets us apart from some of those other technology platforms, do you think of yourself primarily as a PIM? Do you think of yourself primarily as a DAM? Do you think of yourself primarily as a data aggregator? Do you think of yourself primarily as a data syndication platform? How, like, when you think of your core competency that you go to market and you say, "Hey, we think we do this just about better than perhaps anyone else in the market, and this is really where we will plant our flag in the sand and say this is something we're really super focused on as a business."
Yeah, a content syndication platform is the best description of how we act within the walls of our customers. And again, that's the root of our platform, goes back 20 years. And again, the content back then was master data that enabled item setup and supply chain operations. Today, that means a lot more in terms of the types of content that are managed within our platform, delivered from our platform, aggregated within our platform, right? So again, starting with the foundation of our platform as we are a content delivery mechanism between brands and retailers, brands and distributors and retailers, right? That's where we start. When you look at all of the other capabilities that we have that start going into having a syndication platform is only good as having content to syndicate, right? So if you're a brand, what we've recognized is that we can help them syndicate content, but if they don't have it or it's not very good or they can't aggregate it, then it doesn't matter. So we then start looking at what are those sub capabilities that we can start applying to those brands that have this challenge, or maybe all of it is a challenge for them, in which case we provide services whereby just send me your product and I'll just do it all for you. So again, content syndication as a platform is just really the core functionality of what we do. And then we just start plugging holes around that. Then when you get downstream on the retailer side or the e-commerce side, the digital experience side, what we look at then is, all right, we got all this good content, to you. The brand got you solid master data, solid image carousels, all of that. Now, how do you do more with it? And then once you're doing more with it, how do we help the brand understand what's going on over there in e-com land? So digital shelf analytics now start to kick in to help them understand how they're doing, how they could maybe come back and improve some things and perform better online, right? So syndication and then just really just plugging holes around that.
Makes sense. So would you say that you're more of a competitor to, say, a Syndigo than a Feedonomics? So it's like that would be the space more that you play in, and that's your sandpit.
100. Yep.
Okay, so you're not trying to necessarily replace a feed engine for a brand. You're not necessarily trying to create their Google Shopping feeds and their feeds that go to Amazon and their feeds that go to social channels, etc. That's not a place that you're primarily focused in.
We do feeds, but they're primarily retail feeds and then distributors that play in the retail industry, meaning direct connection to the Amazons of the world, the Walmarts of the world, those folks. So we do that business. we are not in the social media feeds and that. So really I'd say our core focus is CPG retail.
Hmm.
So if you look at our customer base, that's where we're playing, is in between those organizations with direct feeds into those retailers.
Wow. So it might be a Procter and Gamble. I'm just pulling a number out of the air. It might be a Procter and Gamble. Hey, we've got these fast moving consumer goods that we manufacture. We're going to create this data set internally inside of our business that applies to our products. We're going to have all the SKU information, the imagery, the package sizes, weights, all that sort of stuff. And then we're going to distribute this information out to our retail partners. It might be let's just say it's a supermarket chain, for example, and they want to receive all of this product data into their own PIM system so that when they go out to their own digital channels and also to their POS systems, et cetera, they've got the accurate product data directly from the manufacturer so that when they put something on sale and they say it's 384 gram tube of toothpaste, that's actually accurate.
Yep, that is a perfect example of where we play today between a big CPG manufacturer like that and a big retailer, just providing that
Plumbing.
super highway, the plumbing, yeah, to get it out of their internal systems, aggregated through our platform to the retailer, and then again downstream. How do we help them understand what may be happening at the retailer? Some of it related to content and some of it not related to content, right? But to help them understand what's happening so that they can potentially work with their merchandisers and solve those issues and so forth.
I guess the great thing about this is if you have a product, let's say I'm a large scale manufacturer and I have a product recall or I have a deprecated product or replaced SKU, I have product succession, I have bundles, kits, and packs, I have, there's a lot that goes on in this space that's really dynamic and it can change very frequently, right? Across a catalog of products. And you effectively want to become the single source of truth for these manufacturers so that their retail partners always have an updated catalog of their products, right? Whatever situation impacts that catalog, you want them to know immediately.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. I'd say we extend that a little bit beyond just the retailers, right? In that there's stakeholders that deserve visibility to this content and need to use it for certain practices that historically maybe we didn't think that hard about. We thought about how do we empower the distributor and the retailer with all this data, but over time realized, man, there's folks inside those organizations that they don't have access to the PIM or the PLM or all of that, but they still need to see this data aggregated. So we've developed mechanisms that just provide more value out of the content that gets put in our system to internal stakeholders. And then what we're seeing is a trend toward using that to power just direct to consumer channels as well.
And I'm guessing that means you also, by definition, integrate with platforms like GS1 so that those manufacturers don't have to think about, oh, we got to have a direct integration between our ERP and GS1 to pull down our barcodes and get all of our official UPCs, et cetera, generated for these specific SKUs. You help them by being able to integrate, okay, I've got this core product data. Now I need to send this off to these standards bodies. I need to pull down some information from those standards bodies and enrich our products with that standards information and those key barcode information, et cetera. And so it feels and correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like you assist these brands in a lot of the compliance work that they need to do from a data perspective, because that's a pain in the ass. If you're doing that and you have to build a custom integration between your ERP and say GS1, it's a pain in the ass. Like like there's some heavy EDI work that needs to happen here to facilitate this. And it feels like you're becoming a product data partner and enrichment partner more than just a syndication service.
Yep, 100%. Yeah. So when you think of that relationship between the resale community and the GS1, so brands and retailers and how they participate, that we are arguably the biggest organization on the planet that assists in that relationship, both technically and then also just from a consulting perspective. How does it work? And by the way, this is what their data model looks like. How do you take your data model and somehow smash it into that data model? So that's a lot of what we do. Just historically, that was our core competency. If you talk to one of our competitors, they'd say that's all they do is that data standard stuff, right? And there was a time where they were right, but today we've just taken that much further in a few different ways, right? So we know that there's way more than standards and GS1 that goes into this equation. So really I've adapted and extended our platform into those into those areas. But there's also ways that you can apply standards more comprehensively to the concept of commerce and just get more out of the work that you go into to educate yourself on the standard and then operationalize it and all of those kinds of things. So you're exactly right. That is very much what we spend a ton of our time doing, is helping in that pursuit.
What are the typical challenges that you would see at the manufacturer level? Like when you start working with a brand for the first time, what are some of the challenges that you see when you go in and I'm guessing there's a fair amount of consulting that goes along with an engagement with a new manufacturing brand partner. What are the kind of challenges that you typically see when you go to work with these guys when you first walk through the door and you say, "Hey, look, you've got this challenge. You may be," or let's reframe this question. When you go in, typically, are they using any kind of service like yours, or are they trying to do it all in-house with their own homegrown IT system and maybe a PIM system, and then they're trying to do these custom integrations with all these other third-party systems, and they're trying to do the heavy lifting themselves? Is that usually what you see when you first get there?
Yeah, a lot. So if you look at our customer base, we are 17,000 brands ranging from the biggest CPGs on the planet all the way down to, small little craft brands that are making one, two, three, four, five SKUs, right? So it varies. When you go into the enterprise guide today, they're all doing this, right? So what they're looking for every time you talk to them is, how can you help me do it better, faster, more efficiently,
Cheaper,
cheaper?
maybe? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Just how do I spend less money doing this stuff? So at the top end, very well educated organizations. They've got subject matter experts that sometimes know as much as we do, but it's just really about, what do you have interesting from a technology perspective that we could do all this stuff a little bit better, right? So that's on the high end. Where we spend probably more of our time, though, is on the long tail guys, the guys that when you walk in there, you never know what you're going to find, right? And it ranges from, they've got it on sticky notes and spreadsheets, and they don't understand at all the concept of global standards and the data model related to that and how that ultimately is going to get projected on the retailer. They have no idea what you're talking about, right? So just a lot of education that goes into that, and then helping them find, you do have height, width, and depth, but it's in this application. And then your marketing copy, Marge wrote it on a sticky note over here, helping them pull that all together and giving them a mechanism to actually have a single point of truth for those little guys, giving them a good, fluid manual experience that they can use to manage this stuff. And then you've got some guys in the middle that are just in varying stages of what we think of is maturity relative to this practice of getting data out into the marketplace in an effective way. And that's where it just it turns into a consulting exercise. You got to go in and understand, what do they know? What do they have? Where is it? And you'll find that some are in better shape than others. But just overwhelmingly, it's just amazing that 20 years into this, I'm still finding the same problems over and over. And I think it's just, people change personnel and they have to relearn as an organization, and they forget about something, or they decommission an application and forgot to think about, how are we going to do that tomorrow if we stop paying for that? So we still see very similar problems that we did back in the day.
Hey team, I have a big favor to ask you. Please pause this episode and send the link of this episode to someone you know that you think would enjoy this content. Really appreciate you spreading the word. This is how we grow. We're not a Joe Rogan. We don't have big, massive advertising budgets, but we absolutely want to grow. We want to get the learnings from all of these episodes out to as wide of an audience as possible, and we need your help to do it. Thank you. And now back to your listening. And how often is it that, especially when you're working with, say, small and medium-sized manufacturers with maybe a relatively small catalog, I'm guessing that when you go in and you start talking to these guys, they potentially don't even realize that if they don't get some of this product data right, they will never be able to have access to the largest distribution channel partners in the world. The Amazons of the world, the Walmarts of the world, the major supermarket chains, the major department stores, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, if you don't have some international standards, because you can, in almost any ERP, you can generate a barcode, for example, and you can apply that, you can have it printed on a label, and you can apply it to your product. But the reality is, if you haven't worked with GS1, for example, to get that into the international standards database, then unfortunately, that's where these guys, these biggest guys, they're pulling down data from the GS1 database on a regular basis, and they're marrying that up with the data you're giving them, and they're saying, well, if there's a mismatch, then we can't list your product. And so the reality is that a lot of smaller players, they don't necessarily realize the compliance and global standards impacts on their products if they don't play nice with those standards. And if they're not even thinking about those standards at all, then it's meaning that they're out of the box. They are limiting the potential penetration of their product if they're not playing nice with these international standards. And specifically, if they are not able to slice and dice their data in the way that the retailer wants it to be delivered to them, then they simply will say, sorry, we can't sell your product. We'd love to sell your product, but we can't. Here's our spec sheet. Here's our attribute. Here is our entire attribute category model, everything, right? Here's our data model. You make sure that the data you sent to us is in this data model. Otherwise, we'll reject it, right? And so how often is it that you are helping these smaller brands to access larger and larger customers in new markets by making sure they understand the ramifications of not doing things the right way?
Yeah, it's all the time, Jason. And so many of them hate us for it because they see us as the bad guy because we're making them. You have to get your data into this format. You have to, because if you can't or don't, you're not going to be able to get it into item setup at retailer XYZ. You just can't. That's how they require you to do it, right? So they look at us as we're the bad guy. We're making them do it, but we're really helping you because if you don't do it, you're not going to have access to those markets. And then just you mentioned the lack of appreciation for how accurate this stuff has to be in the world of automated warehouses and automated picking systems, right? If this thing is not in this slot in the warehouse, all that stuff goes downhill, right?
Yeah.
Or just the big honeycomb systems and all that stuff. That works only because you have accurate dimensions and weights and all of that kind of stuff, identifiers, right? And nobody's thinking about that. The little guy that makes jars of honey in his garage and sells them to his local Kroger store or whatever, he's not thinking about any of that. But unfortunately, all the same rules apply to you. Like all this data gets treated the same way, goes through the same systems. You don't get a pass because you only have 3 or 4 SKUs, right? Yeah, we end up just a lot of what we think about is this core platform of ours that supports hundreds of thousands of transactions a day from a CPG to a retailer they've got millions of SKUs, right? And all of this is automated. They've integrated into our system. Often we've helped them do that with our technology, all the way down to this little guy that all that doesn't matter. You have to have a fluid educational user interface that helps him understand this and do it. Couple that with how-to videos, just all of those things that he needs to know to do. That's just where we spend our days.
And would you typically find yourself integrating with an existing either PLM or PIM system on the manufacturer side? Or I guess maybe if they're a small manufacturer, they might just have a bunch of Google Sheets or spreadsheets with information about their products. And all of a sudden now you're telling them, okay, cool, dump your spreadsheets onto this SFTP server over here. We'll pick them up. We'll update them into our system, and then we'll get those syndicated out to your retail partners, whatever the case may be. So what is I guess, the common architecture or what are the most common design patterns that you're seeing where your platform fits into that stack really neatly?
Yeah, again, we service the entire spectrum. Just for your question there about do we integrate into the common PIM systems, for example. Most of them, if you went out there and ran a PIM RFP today, the names of the PIM manufacturers that you would go to, most of them are integrated into our platform. So they've built out direct machine-to-machine integration into our platform. We have our own version of that kind of a tool that is pre-integrated into our platform, and we can plop it down behind your 4 walls, quote unquote, and that becomes it. We tend to rely on the PIMs that already exist, right? They're good products. They're pervasively used. They're integrated into our platform. Not a lot of work on our part. So we tend to interact with those a lot. But where a guy maybe can't afford one of those, doesn't need that level of sophistication, we've got an answer for you, and we can plop that down and get you going. When you look at the guy that isn't quite at that level of sophistication and maturity where he's really got it pulled together nicely and stored in these systems, and they do leverage spreadsheets, those kinds of things. We have another tool whereby we can, give you access to that. Just dump that stuff in there. We'll sort it out, run it through our little sausage machine and get it into the right format, all the way down to the little guy that just says, I just want to make honey. I don't want to worry about any of this. Here's the information I have. Y'all figure it out from here. We have humans that do that, and humans slowly turning into AI that leverages some of these disparate assets and pulls that all together. And then we'll have a human to see that and just do the work for them. So it is literally across the board when you look at what we have to do when you think of a retailer, and how he engages his entire spectrum of suppliers. And again, it ranges from the biggest guys on the planet down to little guys. All the retailer says is, I just want the same stuff, same quality from everybody. So that's our job, is to get him the same stuff, same quality from everybody, knowing that everybody does it a little bit different, needs a little bit different help in different areas. And so that's our solution suite today, just reflects that comprehensive need that we see in the market.
And I'm guessing that you guys also have to work with WDs, wholesale distributors, as well, because a lot of these wholesale distributors are getting product information in 100 different formats from their manufacturer suppliers. And again, they might be mom and pop shops that send them a spreadsheet or whatever it might be. They might have their own PIM system as a wholesale distributor, which they should have. And they wouldn't need a PLM because they're not manufacturing, but they're distributing. So they usually have their own PIM system. And so I'm guessing that you guys can also sit between the wholesale distribution channel and the retail channel, or the other ends of the distribution channel. But have you ever heard of a platform called DataX as well, by chance?
That's a new one for me.
Okay, interesting. And the reason I asked that question specifically is we've had them on the podcast before, and they fulfill a really unique role in the market in that they work with wholesale distributors to be able to ingest data in whatever format the manufacturer might give it to them in. And it might come in a PDF, it might come in an exploded drawing, it might come in a CSV of product data of some variety. It can images that they'll have to scan and use machine vision to pull out information out of the image and then get that information to a PIM system. So I was just wondering if something like that, where the wholesale distributor could plug something like DataX into your system instead of plugging something like DataX into their PIM, it feels like that may be maybe a more efficient way to get that aggregated data from all these different channels into your system in a harmonized, consistent way. So it'd be interesting to see. I'm happy to make that introduction. Happy to make that introduction off air, but it just feels like you guys are the plumbing, but that original data still has to come from somewhere. And oftentimes it's coming from so many different sources, and it's coming in so many different formats that it's really hard to standardize it sometimes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd love to have that introduction, because we do think really hard about the concept that in a perfect world, the brand would give us everything we needed to run every retail channel. And the reality is they're just not going to, right? They can't afford it. They don't know they need to do it. They just won't do it, whatever that is. And so there's always going to be other providers that can help in that. Data Action, what it sounds like they do, perfect example of that. Another big one in the retail industry today is derived dietary lifestyle information, right? So is a product healthy, keto friendly, or whatever?
Yep.
The brand may not have the wherewithal to make those distinctions just based on what's going into their product. And there's a number of different services that do that today. So we know that's just a contributor to content that's going to come from the brand. And it's only one, right? There's imagery, videos, all kinds of things like that. But yeah, so that is something that we think hard about, and how do we want to handle that within our platform. So would be intensely curious about how they could potentially contribute to that.
Yeah, love it. And when we think of data as an asset, are you helping really? Because when I go into these brands, especially if they're a wholesale distributor, they don't necessarily see data as an asset. They don't, at least until they meet me. They don't necessarily. They look at it as a necessary evil, as opposed to a differentiating factor in their business. And what I see in the market is that the distributors that have the best product data win. It's that simple. If you have the most complete product data set, and you can get that into the hands of the person making the purchase through you in a meaningful way, whether that be through the EDI system or through your self-service e-commerce website or whatever it might be. Basically, when we think about any digital merchandising technology, so let's just say it's just a search, merchandising, and personalization platform. Every single one of those technologies, whether they say they're AI powered or not, they all worked better in the presence of really well-structured product data, right? So if all you've got is a long description for your product and you have no other structured product data other than that, then you're going to struggle, right? You're going to struggle to have your products get merchandised correctly, get put in the right taxonomy, get recommended appropriately using AI when we're doing AI personalization. If we don't have structured product data around your product, and we know, say, for example, let's say, I don't know, let's say you're an apparel business and you have a product description of a red dress, but you don't have structured product attributes that say mid-length cut, burgundy, V-neck, all these different structured product attributes around that product, the fabric, the all that information. If you don't have that in a structured way, even if the personalization technology knows the end customer, 85% of the products they buy from us are red. So therefore, we want to merchandise our red products to them first because we know it's highly likely they're going to convert with that product. You're not going to be in that consideration set. And so the reality is, yes, they can do some AI and they can create word clouds out of unstructured data and things like that. And they can pick up certain semantics and things like that. But you really run the risk as a manufacturer of dropping out of the consideration set if you do not provide data in a way that can be interpreted by these technologies that do the merchandising.
Yeah, you are, holy smokes, man. You're 1,000% correct. And what's interesting about it is when you look at the consumers of the data, the retailers, the wholesale distributors, the food service distributors, whoever that is, they get it. They know I got to have accurate this and accurate that to run my business, right? And that's what they rely on us is to somehow get them there. For the brands, for a long time, even in some cases today, they see it as they're getting all the benefit. I'm doing all the work. What do I get out of all this? It should be pretty obvious. You get to sell your product, and you're not going to for very long if you don't think really hard about how you service that need. So what we try to do is we try to give them some selfish benefits of doing a really good job, right? And just a couple of examples is when you think of any organization has a sales team that's going out into trade shows, they're going out to see merchandisers at retailers, right? To hold conversations about, hey, got this new product. Wouldn't you love to add this to your assortment? And the materials that they walk in with, in many cases today, are just outdated, crummy, printed PDFs, whatever it is, right? And so what we tell them is, guys, you've got all this data right here in the system, right? And we've got a way for you to just repurpose that to empower your team, right? And they go, wow, okay, never thought about that. And they instantly start thinking harder about what they're putting in our system, right? Man, I'm going to really pack it with images. I'm going to get great marketing copy, all this kind of stuff, because now I've got a guy that sits down the hall for me that gets benefit from it. And he's going to tell me how great I'm doing, right? So just examples like that, direct to consumer channels where you want to expose your content on your corporate website. What if you could take it out of the system that you're putting it in to get it to the retailers and just repurpose it to service it on your website, right? And again, they start thinking really hard about, okay, that sounds great. Let's try really hard. To the extent that you end up having to educate the brand on how important this is and why this data really is an asset. And without it, you're just not going to be as successful as you could be. It's just this ongoing education that we find ourselves doing, but continued progress on it, and we'll keep doing it.
I have a real life example of how important it is for brands to have a system and a technology like yours. So I managed the e-commerce function for the largest online retailer of natural health products in New Zealand for a number of years. And when I started there, one of the biggest projects I got involved with is our very first implementation of a PIM system. We'd never had a PIM system before. Our most enriched product data prior to having a PIM system all lived in our e-commerce platform. And of course, that doesn't scale. It's got all sorts of issues with it. So we implemented a PIM system. And what we did, we had over 200 supplier brands and we had over 30,000 SKUs in our database that we sold. We warehoused locally something like 85% of those. And the reality is that when we implemented the PIM system, it took us almost 18 months to get that implemented because what we did is we went out to every one of those suppliers and we said, here's our attributes. Here's the taxonomy we use. Here's all of the attributes we need to be able to merchandise your products correctly, get them in the right categories and subcategories, get the facets and filters going properly, get all of the attribute-based product information pages, because we had dedicated information pages to every single attribute in our system, so that the customer, when they were looking at xylitol, for example, as a sweetener, for example, and they wanted to know about it, then they would be able to find that information on our website and say, okay, yes, I want a product with xylitol, or no, I don't, so I can filter it in or I can filter it out. when I'm looking at a category of vitamin C. Do I want one with natural sweeteners or artificial sweeteners, etc.? So this became really important to us. And what the way that we defined something was unique to our business, right? And so what happened was is when we went out to market, oftentimes the manufacturers did not know what the ingredients were fully in their own products, or where they were derived from, or what the constituent components were, or all these different things. There was a whole bunch of information we needed to be able to get this into our PIM system and get it up and running. And sometimes it required 10 emails back and forth with a supplier, and they would have to go to their ingredient supplier, get information before they could even get the information to us. So what I'm saying is that these brands, they either didn't get listed at all until they gave us that information, or their listings were very incomplete and really basic. And unfortunately, they didn't benefit from all that intense merchandising we were doing around attributes, because we were really merchandising those hard and linking in and out from the PDP, for example, to that information. And so the less information they had, the less chance of making a sale on our website they had. And this is something that we had to educate our suppliers on. We said, we want to bring consistency to how we sell your products, and we need your help to do that. And this is a real life example of just how important this data is from a supplier perspective.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. In that example, that's one retailer educating their supplier community. There's hundreds of those guys, hundreds of retailers, right? And so if you're a supplier, it's 100 guys trying to educate me on exactly how he wants it. So again, that's part of what we try to do is we try to understand how the retailer wants it, and then we try to project that on the brand in a way that's common within the platform so that they don't have to think as hard about what's for this retailer versus that retailer. We look at it as you just got to have all this stuff, and then we'll figure out who it goes to and what's proprietary to this guy versus that guy. So it is a perfect example. And yeah, it's just a continuing education of these brands. And you have to wonder how many brands just never figure that out and aren't brands anymore, right? Because they don't ever get it.
And they oftentimes, our suppliers say, that's your job. You're the retailer. That's the value add you bring. You're supposed to have a merchandising team. You're supposed to be taking all the close-up photos. You're supposed to be doing all these things. And we're like, yes, we have a merchandising team. We got 5 people working on our merchandising team, but there's a 1,000 SKU backlog. So we're taking photos every day. We're looking at product labels and we're typing in information. We're doing that. We've got a whole team dedicated to that. But that takes time. So sure, you could say that's our responsibility, and we're willing to own a certain amount of that. Absolutely. But you got to realize that that you're in a queue now. You're in a line. And if you're late to that queue, you could be SKU number 1001, 1005, 1010, whatever it is. And we're just going to get to you when we're going to get to you. And it could take us 3 months to get to your products. If you don't supply us all this product information, we'll try to generate it ourselves. And we'll try to put it into a format that makes sense for our systems. But you basically jump the queue. If you can provide us all this information so that our merchandising team doesn't have to generate it in-house, then you jump the queue and we'll make you live within a week. And this is something that a lot of these manufacturers don't get either.
And then they forget about the concept that as soon as the retailer just says, you know what, I'm just going to do it for you, you just lost control of your brand voice and your product voice, right? So do you want to tell the story the way you want it told, or you want somebody to do it for you, right? And more often, especially when you think of the emerging craft brands, they're thinking really hard about my story is what's going to sell this product, right? They're thinking really hard about it. That's interesting experience for sure.
And then the brand has the retailer brand has the data as an asset, and you don't. That's the thing, right? Do you really genuinely think of your data as an asset? Because if you do, you want to be the single source of truth around your product. Like you said, it might not even be just the story piece. It might be literally, we want to make sure that, because someone can mistype something, we're human beings. And when you have human beings doing this stuff, mistakes can happen. And the reality is that you're maybe paying interns to help you out with some data manipulation, et cetera. And things happen, right? The mistakes happen. And so the reality is, do these brands genuinely see their data as an asset? And it's something I've been preaching for a really long time. And it sounds like you're on that same bandwagon.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is just like I said, a continuing education activity on behalf of the brands, but I guess it gives us a job. So job security is okay.
Randy, look, nearly an hour has passed by. It feels like we've just started talking, and I'm sure we could talk about this for another few hours. But
Yeah.
what's on your roadmap for, say, the next 6, 12, 18 months? What are some things that your customers are asking you for today, maybe that you don't do that you think, man, we really want to do this? Or is there something in your stack already that you say, hey, maybe our customers aren't necessarily asking for it, but we definitely want to tackle this piece and we
Yeah.
see a need in the market and we think we need to we think we need to be playing in the sandpit.
Yeah, I'll just give you two examples. There's a few, but it's just a buzzword today, AI, but it's also a real thing. And so we're looking at a couple of different ways that we can implement the use of AI. Generative is one of those, right? So for the little guy that doesn't have a marketing team that needs to write some copy that's optimized from a search perspective, you can use AI to do that. So we're already implementing tools like that are the differentiator there is what we're doing is we're driving the prompts that you send to those tools based off the fact-based data that we do have on that product versus just letting this thing go out on the internet and make some stuff up. So that's one. The other application for us of AI is some of the back office stuff that we do from a quality perspective, content reconciliation, knowing that you're getting content from a number of places, brand, and then a few third-party guys. How do you smash that together in an intelligent way using AI and that? That's one, checks the AI box for us in the marketplace, but we actually do get some real business value out of it as well. But the other one is this concept of the over time, you're going to see the replacement of UPC codes on packaging today with QR codes, right?
Yes.
Industry initiative. It's going to happen. And so we know the brands, well, both sides are going to do some work to make that happen. But for the brand, they're gonna for a while probably have both barcodes on their packaging. So they've got some packaging work to do. But the way we see it though, and is that the brand now has a direct to consumer engagement vehicle that they didn't have with the UPC code. And big brands that are starting to do this already, you scan the QR code on their package and they tell you a bunch of fun stuff and show you some videos. Hey, what if you use that as an opportunity to actually show the consumer stuff that if they're holding that thing in their hand in the store, they're trying to decide if I'm going to put it in my cart or not. They scan that QR code and you show them things like ratings and reviews, things that are really going to compel them to go, yep, I do want to buy this product. So that's what we're thinking about. And we're already doing a lot of work around that. In fact, our last acquisition was a ratings and reviews company so that we could power consumer experiences like that. So that's the other one that you said they maybe aren't asking you for it yet, but we know they're going to because they're going to have to do this QR code conversion. And we just want to be out in front of providing them a very turnkey consumer experience that they can put behind that QR code. So just a couple of examples there.
Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. And how do you guys make your money? You're a SaaS platform. You plug into all these back office systems. Do you base it on a SKU level basis? Do you base it on a flat fee plus some sort of subscription model? Like how do you guys make your money?
Yeah, it varies a little bit by solution, but overwhelmingly we are a subscription-based model. That sounds weird when I say it, but we base on company revenue. And the reason that we do that is we've found that to be the closest proxy to what ultimately ends up being the throughput load on our system. So you may have one SKU, but if you're selling 10 billions of transactions a year, probably going to equate to the load of a guy with 100 SKUs, but he's not selling nearly that much. So that's how we price it, subscription-based pricing. When we look at things like content creation, imagery, right? Meaning you send us your product and we take images of it, that's SKU-based pricing. But
Of course.
overwhelmingly, it's a SaaS-based subscription.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And how do you like people to get a hold of you? I will put your LinkedIn link in the show notes as well as the website link into the show notes. But other than that, how do you like people to get a hold of you if they want to talk about all of this amazing stuff around product data, which we know everybody's having trouble with out there?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best way to get in direct contact with me or contact with me. So I monitor that really closely. So that's a great one. Otherwise, just you can go to hello@oneworldsync.com and send any email, and the right ones will get to me. And if it's not a question for me, it'll get to the right folks internally. So that's a great way as well.
Absolutely love it. Now, as we come down to the end of our time together, Randy, this is where I get to flip the script and hand the microphone over to my guest. Let them ask me one question. Any question they like can be personal or professional. So, Randy Mercer from One World Sync, what is your question for me today?
Yeah, holy smokes. I had a bunch of them written down, to be honest, and you answered most of them, right?
Love
Just
it.
through the dialogue. Clearly, you've spent a ton of time in the space, super compelling. I'm curious, what are the one or two things that you're hearing in the marketplace that people are just dying for an answer for, that maybe they're just not finding a vendor that has it? I'm just curious about that.
Look, because I'm so heavily focused on the B2B world, I think for me, B2B is still, even from a technology perspective for the B2B e-commerce space,
Yeah.
we're still 5 to 10 years behind the B2C and D2C space. That's slowly starting to change. I'm seeing search and merchandising and personalization platforms now starting to think about B2B. And they're going, okay, we have restricted catalogs in the B2B world, so we can't just show everything. We've got custom price lists. We need to show people the right prices. We need to show their right MOQs. We need to show their correct buying increments. We need to show all these different things that are unique by customer in the B2B world. And that to me is the distinct difference between B2B and B2C. Is in the B2C world, everybody's seeing the same catalog 99% of the time.
Yeah.
They're seeing the same price. They're seeing the same. There is no such thing as an MOQ. We're trying to cross-sell, upsell, and we're trying to extract as much value out of them in that first sale as we can, because we don't know if they're ever going to be back. Whereas in the B2B world, we're trying to remove friction from the buying process because by definition, they're a long-term customer. By
Right.
definition, their AOV is through the roof. By definition, their LTV is through the roof. By definition, it's harder to onboard them because we're going to be issuing them with a credit limit and these buying tiers and requirements and all this sort of stuff. So it's a two-way commitment of sharing data with one another in the B2B world. And so I really do think that a lot of these technology platforms that have historically only ever focused on the B2C space, they're starting to get religion around B2B because the B2B growth projections are so much greater, at least until 2030. Those projections are orders of magnitude larger than the growth projections for B2C. And so I'm seeing more and more technology brands take notice of this, but we still got a long way to go because there's still a lot of technologies out there that I would go and I would help do search and select for on behalf of my customers, my clients. And in finding the perfect fit platform out there is it's still a bit of a slog in some instances. And that's got to get better. It's got to get easier. It is slowly, but there are definitely still some technology gaps out there. Whereas in the B2C world, the design patterns are much more uniform and much more consistent, especially at different levels of growth of a B2C business. Okay, day one, you start out with this stack with Shopify at the top, and you start out with maybe Xero or QuickBooks in the back end and maybe a few apps. And then when you get up to the next level, you go here, and then you get up to the next level, you go here. And it's a pretty well-trodden and well-known path. In
Yeah.
the B2B world, there is no one-size-fits-all design pattern yet.
Yeah.
And there probably will never be, but certainly I think there will become more unification in that space over the next 5 to 10 years. It's already coming. I'm already starting to see some technology brands start to take the lead in this space. And it's just, I'm seeing the same pattern repeat that happened starting 10, 15 years ago in the B2C world.
Yeah, that's interesting, Jason. You opened my eyes there a little bit. We do think relatively hard about the B2B space, but maybe not hard enough just based on what you just depicted there. Interesting insights for sure.
Oh yeah, and look, these manufacturers in the industrial space, say for example, or whatever, they've got really super complex products. And
Yeah.
I would argue their products are actually more complex, and they have more issues around creating and aggregating data in their space than in the CPG space, for
Yeah.
example, where that CPG space is pretty well trodden in terms of, okay, this is how we create our products. Here's the ingredients. It's a pretty well trodden path. But man, I tell you, in some of the more traditional B2B manufacturing brand spaces, their products are much more complex, and their buying cycles are much longer as a result. And sometimes there's literally lives on the line for their products if it fails, for example. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
it's got to have load bearing capabilities and flow capabilities and all these different attributes around the product, the engineering attributes around the product, as opposed to just the consumer facing attributes of a product. Yeah, I'm super excited. Randy, I really appreciate your time. This was a fantastic chat. I learned a ton, and I'm sure my audience did too. Can't wait to do it again with you soon, my friend.
Yeah. No, it's great. Enjoy the conversation, Jason.
Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.